Okay, guys, so this is the 2022 Software Design and Development exam for the HSC, and this is going to be section 2, which is the short answer. All right, so describe 2 responsibilities of software developers when developing new systems. So there's a few. So with theory, it's not like the algorithm part, it's not like the multiple choice where there's an absolute correct answer. Usually there's a bit of wiggle room to make your case, because it's basically like, can you basically make convincing arguments about what responsibilities of software developers are? So, so there's like you can think of a lot of things. You can be quite creative. So examples would be if you attack, say, intellectual property. You could tackle privacy, like maintaining user privacy. You could tackle like maybe security. Um, uh, um, you could say like, responding to the client's feedback in a timely manner. So they, responding to client feedback or user feedback, really quickly, not like delaying and lagging. So you could like literally take any of these and just run with it, right? So basically how you would phrase this is, just keep it simple. Just say one responsibility a software developer would be, um, you know, making sure to maintain the privacy of the user, but by making sure that that when the new system, when the user provides their own personal data to the new system, that we don't sell that data to advertisers without their consent, right? So we don't take user data and sell it to advertisers, right? So we make sure that the user data is safe, secure, and private, right? And then you could say, the other responsibility would be to make sure that, as a developer, we respond to user complaints and feedback in a timely manner, because if we don't, then the user can become upset, and might leave us a nut, might that might cause problems for us, right? Because so it's our responsibility to be responsive, because we don't want to cause undue stress to the user by not knowing what's going on, and if they're experiencing a problem. So yeah, so you just pick one of these, run with it, say a sentence or two that sounds reasonable, and you'll get full marks. So cool. All right. Explain the need for maintenance in the software development cycle. So first off, whenever you hear the software development cycle, I always ask students, what is the software development cycle? And when you think about this, you need to always think about the 5 stages, right? And you need to remember these stages off by heart, because if you don't, you're gonna be hit with a question that is just going to throw you off. So say it with me. It's defining and understanding the problem. It's defining and understanding the problem. Stage 2 is planning the solution. Stage 3 is implementing the solution. Stage 4 is testing and evaluating the solution. And stage 5 is modifying and maintaining the solution. So when it says maintenance, we're talking about stage 5, okay? So, a strong answer could be, maintaining the software is the last stage of the software development cycle. And the reason you want to maintain the solution is due to changed requirements from the client or the customer, the user, right? Also, if the software is a live service, like a website, you know, you need to maintain the website to keep it running, like maintain, you know, say, keep the servers running. You know, if there's a bug or an update to the server or you know, there's a bug encountered from just from the live service of the app or the software, you may need to deploy an update to fix that bug. Or so it's either like there's a bug or some scenario that you didn't realize during testing emerges and you have to release an update to keep the software running, or the client comes to you and says, look, I need this extra feature. Can you implement it? And then you basically maintain the solution that way. So that would be a strong response. So you know where it sits in the stage, and you know why you need to do it. So B, one way of making future maintenance easier is by using explanatory comments in the code. Explain 2 other ways in which programmers can write code that makes maintenance of the software system easier. So, okay, so once again, there's a lot of angles of attack you can do. There's no like one right answer. You pick something that sounds reasonable and you'll get the marks. So you could like, so a lot of angles of attack, I'm just going to list a bunch. So one was to make sure that your code uses modules effectively, right? So the idea of modules and submodules is to break up the code into smaller pieces. So it's easier to, so one purpose of a module is to organize the code. So you could talk about modules, like approaching a project with the modular approach. Another thing is to, when you do use modules, making sure the modules are focused on a single task, right? And not overloaded. Another thing you can talk about is literally just making sure there's plenty of white space in the code, like all these extra lines between modules, just so it looks neater, so it's easier to read, so readability. So literally you can talk about either of those 2 and explain your case, like I've just done, and you'll get the marks. Okay, 23. Compare the use of an interpreter with the use of a compiler. Consider the perspective of both the programmer and the client. Okay, so this is a common sore spot for students, because it's a fairly loaded question and they always like to throw something like this into the course. So you need to know exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about interpreters and compilers. So let's talk about it. So the idea is the category of this question is code translation, right? And the purpose of translation of code is, the idea is that, you know, machines, the fundamental like language of a machine is like zeros and ones, right? And as humans, we don't understand that. So we create more abstract languages that we understand, and sort of so we can tell the computer what to do. So we create these high-level languages like Python or C or JavaScript or whatever. And then the idea is that those languages are then translated into zeros and ones. And the way you do that is with a translator, and the translator comes in 2 flavors. It's either an interpreter or a compiler, right? Now, so that's the category. Now, to actually answer this question, I would, in fact, so that's the idea. That's to orient yourself. So the first line can be like, so you can say interpretation and compilation have to do with translating code from a high-level language to a machine-level language, right? That's a strong opening, right? So you know the context of what we're dealing with, right? Then I would say interpretation is when, and we're going to talk about interpretation, right? So I would say interpretation is when the translation happens line by line, okay? And interpretation is reserved for scripting languages that aren't performance intensive, right? For example, a website, a dynamic website, or a simple script, right? So for example, JavaScript is the building block of the internet, which helps create dynamic functionality on the internet, right? Like interactivity. Or you can say Python to create a very simple app, right? Like a crossword puzzle, right? So the interpreter itself is a very simple program. So it's simple and convenient, but the downside is it's slow, right? So I'd say that. Then I would say the compiler is the opposite, right? The compiler is translated all at once. It's not done line by line. And the purpose of the compiler is for efficiency, right? And its target is for performance, where performance is critical, right? So for example, if you're creating like a heavy 3D application, like a video game, or you're creating like an app for a mobile device, which has very limited resources, you'd have to do compilation, right? So those are the key differences, right? So if you favor convenience and also write it once and it deploys everywhere, you do interpretation. Whereas compilation is more about performance. So like, let's say you need to render 3D graphics, you need compilation. The other thing I'll say is interpretation the code can be executed directly, but compilation has an extra step where you compile the program into something called an object file. On Windows, it's called a .exe, and then the user then executes that. So there's like an extra step to the process. So just to summarize, interpretation is simple and convenient, but it's slow and not good for performance-heavy applications. Compilation is a bit more complicated and has an extra step in the translation, but it's far more optimized. So, for example, interpretation is like JavaScript, and the idea is JavaScript can run anywhere, right? Any web browser, any operating system like Windows, Android, Mac OS, whatever, iOS. Compiler, you need to create an object file, and this object file is unique to the operating environment, such as Windows or Android or iOS, right? So for example, if you're creating Fortnite, you need to you'd have to create a separate version of Fortnite for every device, such as Android, such as iOS, such as Windows, such as Mac, such as Linux, right? Such as Xbox 360, whatever, right? So there's a lot more complicated, there's more steps. Okay, so you don't have to write all that for this question, but it's good to understand the context. So you could just focus on the key points, right? If you use only a few of the points I've mentioned, you'll convince the marker that you'll know what you're talking about, right? So now for this part, consider the perspective of both the programmer and the client. I would say, first off, you could phrase it as if the client's needs are for a simple web app, right? That can be deployed to anywhere, then you would go for an interpreted, software, right? Because you favor that simplicity and convenience of deploying everywhere. If the client wants like a 3D application, like a video game, or wants to deploy just to mobile devices and favors performance, then you want to go for a compiled language. In terms of for a programmer, interpreted languages like Python are a lot easier to learn and more simple, and there's less like development overhead. Whereas for a programmer, compiled languages are usually a lot more intensive and require more work. So I could talk about this a lot more, but we'll leave it for that. That's enough for you to think about. If you pick any of the stuff and you only picked a few of the points that I mentioned, you'll get full marks, right? There's no doubt. So, okay, EBNF. Following EBNF definitions specify syntax for a particular language. blah, blah, blah. With reference to the line numbers, describe 3 syntax errors in this code fragment. All right, so it's like find the bug, basically. Now, eBNF comes in a few flavors in this course. So this is one of the flavors where it like literally gives you the syntax of a language, and then it says go do something with it. Sometimes with eBNF, it'll say, here's, write some, here's a railroad diagram and convert it to eBNF, or here's some eBNF, convert it to a railroad diagram. So this is the first kind of type of question you'll see. So how to read this is basically you've got this assignment, and then you've got the things you have to worry about. So the symbols that you need to consider are the carets, the line, the curly brace, the box brackets, and the parentheses. So this refers to a submodule. This is an or statement. This is a 0 or more repetitions. This is an optional option. And then this is just a grouping, right? Everything else is basically part of the actual syntax of the language, right? These are the symbols that reference to eBNF, so you got to be careful, right? So basically to read it, for example, let's start with something simple. So assignment is, so that the actual thing would be make this, then you have a variable, which is defined elsewhere, comma, and then you have a grouping of that variable or just a value, right? So an example statement you might actually see might be like, make this X that Y, right? Assuming that variable is like a name, like a letter, right? Or you might say, make this X 3, right, as a value, assuming that value was 0 to 3 or something, right? They don't actually tell you what value or variable is, so I'm just making an assumption here, but that's how you'd actually, if you would actually to write is in this syntax, that's how it would be, right? So X and Y are just random variables I made up, and the 3 was a random value I made up. Okay, so, and then you go, okay, then you have iteration, and then you have like while ever condition. So basically you just unpack it as I've done, right? And once again, you see square brackets, so that means it's an option. Yeah, and so I'll just jump back to this. So notice how like I noticed there's a line, which means or. So basically it's like, it's this or this. Actually, I've already seen a bit of a bizarre thing. With an or statement, you got to be careful, because usually with an or statement, you want to group stuff together. So this is actually going to be this or this, right? So the or statement's not working as intended here. So let's see. So what are we on? Okay, so actually, no, that's fine, because basically it's like this or this. So it's the next adjacent thing. So that's fine. So basically how to do this is just how to answer this question is just run your eyes over this, just get a feel for it. And then I would say just start working your way line by line, trying to figure out if there's any bugs. So start with line 1, make this score that age 18. All right, so we go make this score. So score is a variable, comma, and then we say that age 18. Now, so we have that, and then we have a variable, presumably called age. Now, the problem here is you can't have 18 because it's like, it's either you say that age or you have a value, right? So you can't have both. So that is a bug. So that's the first bug. So that's 1 mark. While ever score is less than 18, so score less than 18 is the condition. Okay, obviously you're missing a do here. So that's a bit bizarre. So that's the second bug. So see how it's like while, if you have while ever, then you have a condition and assume the condition is score less than 18. You're supposed to have a do before you have all the statements. So that's a bug. The other thing is you have 3 displays, but this only accommodates 2 displays, 2 statements. So I think that might be a bug. That might be the third one. I'm just going to look at section now. When score is greater than 70, do statement and statement. And what looks suspicious is for some reason it doesn't have an and here for the second statement. So I think those are not right. Yeah, so all of those are bugs. So plenty of bugs. I think there's actually more than 3 bugs. So you can pick either of those, right? And you'll be fine. So yeah, that was pretty easy. Okay, so question 25. A developer has been employed by a local high school to design and develop a study app to track students' HSC revision routines. The app must be ready as soon as possible. The app will provide links to resources for all subjects, track the number of hours students are logged on the site, track the number of past examination papers assessed, allow students to input questions for teachers, send reminders to students who have not used the app. Recommend and justify a suitable development approach for this HSC revision app. Okay, so with development approaches, you can pretty much, like, there is a bit of flexibility. Once again, you can pick any one you want and get away with it and run with it. The 2 major ones are like basically agile or structured, right? And then usually you can also talk about how, like for example, you have prototyping, which can be a part of structured or agile. You can also talk about like end user. So usually, like, there was a question in multiple choice, which we talked about, where like the answer was end user because the person created software for themselves. So you're the end user. You also have like prototyping, where you create a prototype to demonstrate to the client. But the main ones are probably these 2. So structured is, once again, it's about if you're doing for a large project where there's a very low tolerance for failure, like let's say you're creating medical software for a hospital that administers dosages of medicine, right? That has to be structured because if you make a mistake, it's catastrophic. Agile is more for like stuff that's low risk that you want to just quickly get a lot of iterations to get feedback and improve, right? So in this scenario, the app is to be ready as soon as possible. So there's a time constraint. So I would say probably Agile would be better because Agile is usually quite quick. So you get something out as soon as possible, and you rapidly iterate based on feedback. Um, so, um, so yeah, so that's it. Just say Agile. I'll choose the Agile approach because it allows for consistent feedback and quick updates to the app. Um, uh, because this app is low risk, and there's, if there is a bug or mistake by going fast, that bug or mistake is not going to be catastrophic. So it can be easily fixed. And since, as I said, since the client wants it to be ready as soon as possible, the Agile is the best choice here. So if you talk about that, you'll get the marks there. Describe one benefit for using the pilot installation for this HSC revision app. Now, installation methods is a separate kettle of fish. So basically, you've got pilot, you've got like phased, you've got direct, you've got parallel, right? So once again, that's something you just need to know off the bat for all this entire course. So pilot is like basically where you deploy it to like one segment of the market or one subset of the market. You see how it goes, you get feedback, you improve the product, and then you deploy it to like the rest of the world or the market, right? So it just says describe one benefit, the use of the pilot installation. So you could say one benefit of the pilot installation method is to minimize the risk of some sort of bug affecting lots of users if a bug is found in the software, right? So like let's say you deploy the app to just one school. If there is a bug that makes people, I don't know, lose their hours logged or something, then that'd be less severe than if you deployed it to like 100 schools, right? So it minimizes the risk of a failure by only deploying it to one area and then you can fix any bugs as you go along. So that would have been a fine answer. So, okay. C, outline 2 reasons why system testing is necessary in the development of the HSC revision app. This is kind of bizarre, but okay. So 2 reasons. So system testing is basically like you're testing the system in different, like you're basically testing the entire system, right? So one reason would be you want to test the system, how it operates on different devices, basically, right? So what is this? This is a web app, an app. So basically, like I would say you'd want to test it on different devices, like say Android and iOS, right? Because maybe on the iOS version, it works fine, but then you deploy it to Android and there's all these bugs. So that's why you need to do a lot of system testing on both apps. The other thing is like maybe, I don't know, you're storing you're logging details in a server or something, right? In a server somewhere. And maybe like you need to make sure you need to do something called load testing, where like, let's say, you test your app to work if 100 people are using it simultaneously, but it goes viral and now there's like 10,000 people using it. So now there's like a problem with like the server crashes. You need to kind of be aware of that, right? So those 2 reasons would have been fine. Explain 2 factors outside the developer's control which can affect the quality of the user experience with this revision app. So this is once again a bizarre question. So things that are outside the developer's control. Okay, we'll just say the device, right? Like, I don't know, maybe there's a different experience from like an iPad to like a tiny like a 4-inch phone, right? Compared to like whatever it is, like a 10-inch tablet, right? And I don't know, maybe in your testing, you only had time to test like the most common phone type, which is like 5.5 inches. And so the app is a bit bizarre and it doesn't really, the quality decreases if you have like a giant tablet or a tiny phone. So that would be one. And I don't know, like maybe the guy is running like who's using the 4-inch phone is running like a super old version of Android that doesn't actually work properly. So when you install your app, it just is buggy as hell. And you can't really control for it because you just can't spend the resources to make it work on a really old version of Android because it's, whatever. So yeah, so you can just go something like that. 26, explain 2 ways in which case tools can improve the productivity of a development team during the development of a large software project. So look, as I said, plenty of angles of attack here. Case tools is a very broad thing. I'm just going to pick out like version control as one, right? And I'm going to pick the other one as Gantt chart generators, right? So literally anything. So version control is basically like especially with a large team. So version control is basically like you have like version 1, version 2, version 3. And the reason version control improves productivity during the development of a large project is because um, it keeps all the developers on the same version. So it makes sure that if you have all these team members working on your software, you don't want them to have different code versions, right? You want them to all be in sync with the same version. So like, let's say you've got John and Sarah, right? Sarah deploys an update to this to like fixes a bug, right? But if John isn't on the latest version, he is trying to create a feature that still has the bug that Sarah fixed. So version control makes sure that if Sarah fixes a bug, that John's version is then updated to the version that they're all working on, right? So which is critical because like that kind of out of sync with your code could like literally cost you hours of time. So version control, Gantt chart generators, you could just say that, obviously with a large project, you have a lot of resources at play, like team members, and tasks for the project and team members who are doing those tasks. So you need to you need to create a Gantt chart as a project manager. You need to create a Gantt chart to see what people are working on, and how far they've progressed. So a Gantt chart generator could save you time by creating the Gantt chart for you. So you don't have to kind of mess around in say Excel or something, trying to figure out how to create this Gantt chart. So yeah, you could pick anything really. There's a bunch of case tools you can do. Like creating test data as well as another one. So just pick one, run with it. Oh, okay. So fast food. Let's see, how much have we got? Okay, so let's go back to fast food. Okay, so reading this, the fast food authorized customers be able to select available food items. The system authenticates users. Input allows them to input choices. Calculate and display the total cost of the food item. Determines if they qualify for a discount. Transfer the amount of money due from the account to the restaurant's account. Add the total cost of this order to the customer's total purchases to date. All right, so create an IPO diagram. All right, so this is quite a big question. There is a lot involved and a lot going on. So first off, an IPO diagram is like it's a table with 3 columns, and each column represents the input, the process, and the output. So the basic idea is the input would be some sort of variable, right? You're inputting a variable. Process would be some process you're doing. It could be like literally lines of code, some sort of instructions you're executing, and then the output is like what you display to the user, basically. So what we're going to do is just go input, process, output. So the first thing we want to think about, so if we look at the steps, right? Big step one would be authentication, right? Then you have the step of choosing the items and making a tally and charging the user. And then the third stage would be like calculating the total cost so far. So okay, so let's start with the authentication. So with authentication, we're thinking, how do you authenticate a customer or a user? It's going to be like a username and password. And like, how do you store the username and password? So you're going to have some sort of like customer. So you're going to have to record all this information from a customer. So it's going to be like their account balance, their name, their username, their password, all this stuff. So the thing you probably need is a record. So what you want to do is the variables we're going to deal with is probably like a customer ID, right? We're going to have a password. We're going to have some sort of like customer record, right? So you have an ID. So the ID could be their username, their first name, whatever. Then you have the password. Then you have a customer record. And the idea of the customer record is what we have stored on the server. And then the customer enters their username and password, and then we cross-reference the two, right? So basically it would be like get ID and password from customer record and compare to entered inputted ID and password. Right, so that's it. Then the output would be, then you have to think about like what happens. So like it's either like, you'd output like incorrect password or ID, or like no such ID exists, or you could say like successfully logged in, right? So that would be the 3 steps, right? So that's the authentication stage. So now, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. Now we have to do the IPO for the stage 2, which is actually like buying all the stuff. So what we're going to do here is think about what variables. So the user is going to input their food choices. So it would say item number. And then, yeah. Okay, so basically rereading this. So basically, when we say allow the customer input their food choices, they input multiple at a time. So they could say like, I want, I don't know, whatever, I want an apple, a banana, and a sandwich, right? So they input all these food items together. So so the input would be the item numbers, and then also how many of those you'd buy, and then like some sort of like, once again, an item record, which tells you like, if they order a banana, tell me how much that banana costs, right? So yeah. So the process would be, you can write something like, I'm just going to use kind of Python here. So for each item that was entered, you would grab the item record based on the item number. Right? Then you would say the cost equals the item, whatever the item cost, multiplied by how much they bought, right? If they bought 3 bananas and the bananas cost $3 each, you want to know that the total cost is $9. And then you just update the total cost, right? Total cost equals total cost plus cost, right? The idea is, so there's a few things here after rereading. You want to have the total, you want to keep adding the costs so that the current transaction from customer, you want to add the total, right? So if I want 2 bananas, 2 apples, and a sandwich, you calculate the total cost. And then what you want to do is compare if the customers ordered over $100 to date. So their total orders over however long they've been shopping there is over $100, then you give them a discount. So that's the for loop. So you calculate the total cost, and then you say, if the total cost plus the customer dot total purchases is greater than 100, I'm just going to continue this on the right here. Then you would so the total, then you apply the discount. So total cost equals total cost times 0.9. So you apply a discount. And then you have to add the total cost to the customer dot total purchases, and then you just say update customer file, right? So that's it. So that's a lot of stuff. So basically, grab all the items, right? And let the user input all the numbers of the items they want. Calculate the total cost of all those items. If the total purchases of the customer over the lifetime they've been a customer, plus the current total purchases is greater than 100, then apply a 10% discount. So that's that. So actually it was my mistake. So this would be stage 1, this would be stage 2, and then this would be stage 3, was where you actually charge them the amount, right? So back to stage 2, what we want to look at is the output. So the output would be, well, let's think about it. What do you want to display? You want to display the item dot name, how much display you want to display the item dot cost, right, to the user. You want to display the updated customer file and maybe display the total cost, right, of the purchase, right? So that's basically the entire thing. So yep, so that's stage 2. So stage 3, so we'll clear the board. So stage 3, which is actually charging, so IPO, right? So this is all going to be one IPO diagram that you have to draw. I don't have enough space, so just put it all in one diagram. The stage 3 would be charging. So basically, you would just say the input would be total cost. So then you would just say transfer total cost from customer dot account balance to restaurant dot account balance, right? And then you just say update accounts, right? And that's pretty much it. That's your IPO diagram. So so identify the variables you need. In this case, you kind of the difficulty with this was probably having to imagine what kind of data types and structures you're going to need. In this case, you needed to figure out, because you're authenticating the user, you need to kind of assume that, okay, well, there's going to be some sort of customer file with the name, the password, and their current balance, right? So you need to kind of fill in those gaps. And obviously capture the processing in this IPO table. So, okay, so moving on to part B, design an appropriate data structure to store customer details for this fast food ordering system. Do not include food choices in this data structure. So obviously it's a customer file, so it's going to be a record. So obviously, customer first name, right? Customer last name. So customer ID, customer password, customer account balance, total purchases, amount. You can even store, their bank details, so like BSB, an account number, right? If you want to charge them directly. A customer account balance could be like credits if you want to subtract from that. So this is a pretty standard record of like a customer. Notice how the ID is different from like the name, because the ID usually, like when you create an account, you would want to create like an ID, like the email is your ID, right, or your username. So so that would be a data structure. In this case, you can also, what they're looking for is also to identify the data, like what the type it is. So in this case, this would be text. This would be text. This would be text. This is pretty much all text. The customer balance would be like an integer. A float, right? Total purchase amount would be a float. BSB would be like probably a text number, and this would be text. And then you can also say like the number of bytes. So yeah, so that's pretty much fine. Yeah, so you just kind of describe what would be in this data structure. Before the start of development of this fast food ordering system, the project manager has provided with information about the project with the project team, including how many members are available and the skills. Describe how the project manager can use a Gantt chart effectively throughout the development of this system. Okay, so Gantt chart. So you could just say a Gantt chart is a project management tool where basically you assign all the tasks that need to be completed, and also the ordering in which the tasks need to be completed before you can proceed to the next task. So not only can you assign, and then also on the Gantt chart, you assign specific team members to the tasks to be completed, and you give like an estimated time frame to complete that task. And then you update the Gantt chart later with the actual time that it took to complete, right? So basically, it's important because it allows you to manage your team and the resources available to complete the project in the most efficient way possible. So this allows the project manager to like monitor progress as you progress, and the tasks themselves. So in this case, that's a general description of a Gantt chart, and to get the full marks, you should apply it concretely. So you could say tasks that would be completed on the Gantt chart would be like, say, customer authentication, or updating the account file, the account balance of the customer. Either of those would have been fine. So, okay. Question 28. Actually, what we're going to do is probably leave it there, and I'll do another video, the next part, on another day. So we'll get to 28 next time.